I'm at the Jersey Finance Funds Conference, London 2019, with economist, author, and former Director of Economic Policy at the White House, Todd Buchholz. Todd, nice to see you.
Good to be with you.
Welcome to London. Todd, we are in a period of significant global political instability, and I'm just interested in your views on the impact of this turmoil on the funds industry.
Well, this is a time of extraordinary political turmoil. Here in London, the U.S. will have an election next year. We've probably never seen this much political instability, and yet it's a time of relative peace in the world. I mean, thankfully, there's no world war going on. There are troops deployed in various places, but this is not seen as a political crisis in any place. So in terms of fund management, we also have the extraordinary situation of negative and low interest rates throughout the world. There's an uneasiness among many investors because they think that something is very wrong with the world, and yet equity markets have done quite well and continue to do well despite the political headlines. So as people are wondering, what do we do with our money in a situation where the political headlines tell us we should run for the hills, and yet the financial headlines are really not bad at all? They're looking for advice. Individual investors and institutional investors are trying to figure out what goes on, and they want to find trusted partners. So those fund management companies that can demonstrate some sense of stability in uncertain times are in a prime position to attract investors.
So do you still see that there are opportunities for good quality fund managers in certain classes?
Well, I certainly think there are good opportunities. There is the question about whether the passive investment craze will peter out at some point. Maybe it already has. Enough individual investors know about exchange-traded funds and index funds and so on. So is this now the time for active management? It's really hard to say. It might very well be. I don't think it was passive managers who discovered Facebook and discovered Amazon. And so those active managers who really can demonstrate their insights and put it to work, I think are probably well positioned. But not everyone who's an active manager should be an active manager, but some should, because some can do extraordinary research and have extraordinary insight.
The biggest part of our fund business in Jersey is in the alternatives. Mm-hmm. And do you have a view on the opportunity in the alternatives area?
Of course, alternative investment can mean so many different things, whether it's commodities or hedge funds, private equity, and the like. I actually have been looking very recently at the portfolios of major universities and endowments in the U.S., Stanford, Harvard, places in that realm. And it actually is quite impressive, the proportion of funds that are in alternative investments. And this comes in a period where simple equities have done rather well. So if you think that Stanford and MIT and Harvard and Yale are smart money, the smart money does seem to be looking more and more towards alternatives, especially as we've enjoyed this amazing bull market since the Great Recession in 2009. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that goes back to your earlier comment about the markets have done so well, but people are still worried about the fast growth and how long it can last.
Yes, particularly in the U.S., which has in many ways shaken off the dread and the worry in other parts of the world. We don't have in the U.S. yet negative interest rates, but interest rates really are scraping bottom. And the fact is, especially for investors who perhaps think simple equities are too risky, those investors can't earn any return in a bank. You know, bank certificates of deposit paying 0.0 something percentage, you know, are not attractive. Frankly, I think of my mother's investment portfolio, so to speak. My mother used to be very happy with with her funds in a bank CD. Not only would she get a return on her investment, she'd get an appliance, a toaster, or a set of glassware. That doesn't happen anymore. So even my mother is asking, what alternative investments are there that don't have me placing money simply in the bank and don't have me worry each day about the equity market? And so whether that's properties or commodities or other forms or private equity, you know, there really is, I think, a greater hunger to learn more and to make a determination.
Right. You mentioned your mother, which gives us the opportunity to ask a couple of personal questions. You've had a fascinating career spanning lots of different areas. What were the most enjoyable areas that you were involved in, the ones you got most personal satisfaction out of?
Well,
or is that an unfair question?
Well, I try to be engaged every day and every week, so I try to find things that are interesting to me at any point. And the fact is, when you're immersed in something and it's at its most challenging, you might not really be enjoying it, you know, so much at that moment. I mean, I can tell you, I served in the White House. I've advised several presidents, but I served in the White House as a young man for George Herbert Walker Bush, President of the United States, the first Bush. He, quote, won the first Gulf War. His popularity rating was 90%. People forget that his defense secretary was Dick Cheney, who then became vice president for W. Bush. When Dick Cheney would walk into a restaurant after winning the Gulf War as defense secretary, people would stand up and cheer. Now he's seen as a kind of devil figure. There was a movie that Christian Bale starred in last year called Vice about the nefarious Dick Cheney. So anyway, the point is, midway through the George Herbert Walker Bush presidency, popularity was 90%. Of course he was going to be reelected, but then the economy began to turn down. Bill Clinton was a formidable campaigner, and suddenly George Herbert Walker Bush could do no right. So I'm a young man at the White House at that time. I had been serving a president who got standing ovations every time he walked down opened up his door, and now suddenly he was feckless. That wasn't a fun time to advise him. It wasn't an exhilarating time, but looking back, it certainly gave me insight into the political process, into human nature. So, you know, I hope that that people in their careers and in their personal lives, even when things aren't going as well as they should, they realize that they will learn something from that. So, you know, I've been very lucky.
Okay. The interesting thing that I was fascinated about is your involvement with Jersey Boys. I think I mentioned to you, I've seen it twice on Broadway, once in Vegas, and it's a super show. But tell us the story of Jersey Boys and Todd.
Yes. Jersey Boys. I was born in Manhattan, and when I was a young child, my parents moved to the Jersey Shore. So I grew up on the beach in the Jersey Shore. And of course, the Jersey Shore is where Bruce Springsteen started. I grew up not far from Bruce Springsteen and Frankie Valli and so on. So about 15 years ago, no, about almost 20 years ago, Frankie Valli had decided that he wanted to have a musical based on his life. So he engaged some writers, and they camped out in San Diego, where I live, and they wanted to begin this show in San Diego and then bring it to Broadway. And the theater scene in San Diego has been known to incubate for Broadway very effectively. So they began writing the script. I read an early draft of the script, and I said, I want to be in. I want to be invested in this. I want to be one of the original producers. And I was lucky enough, because at that time no one heard of the show. Frankie Valli was seen as some, you know, old-time act from the 1960s. There weren't a whole lot of people taking out their checkbook to be involved in this enterprise. But what got me hooked on it was not necessarily the music, but the script and the story, the mafia connection, the striving, the failure, the arc. And so I got involved, and my wife was very deeply involved in the theater itself. And so, you know, we've had the privilege of watching this, watching it develop, and we were here on opening night in London when it opened, and it's really been a lovely part of my extracurricular career, my wife's professional career.
Well, fantastic. It's just a wonderful show. Really.
Well, and I hope you see it again, because I have college tuition to pay for my children.
Okay, well, that's as good an excuse as any.